Hey everyone, welcome back to Hacker News Daily, where we break down the top stories from the front lines of tech. I'm your host, and today is August 5th, 2025. We sifted through 30 stories that hit Hacker News today, and wow, the four that rose to the top paint a fascinating picture of where we are in tech right now. We've got OpenAI dropping what might be their most surprising release ever, Google DeepMind claiming they're building stepping stones to AGI, developers wrestling with what AI really means for productivity, and Safari users finally getting a taste of proper ad blocking. Sort of. Let's dive right in with what has to be the shock announcement of the week. Now, not everyone's drinking the Kool-Aid completely. There's this really detailed technical analysis from a user called Foundry27 who points out that architecturally, these models aren't using the latest innovations we've seen from Chinese labs. They're not using things like multi-head latent attention or the shared expert systems that DeepSeek has been pioneering. The suggestion is that OpenAI is keeping their real architectural innovations close to the chest, releasing good models but not their best techniques. And then there's the reality check from actual usage. A user named Blue Coconut tried using it for real coding tasks with large contexts, and, well, the pre-filled times were 2 to 3 minutes. That's not exactly usable for interactive work. So while everyone's excited about running frontier models locally, there are still some practical limitations when you're dealing with real-world applications that need large context windows. But despite these caveats, the overall sentiment is overwhelmingly positive. This feels like a watershed moment. For the first time, we have near-frontier AI capabilities that can run on consumer hardware without needing cloud infrastructure, without subscription fees, without worrying about rate limits or privacy concerns. You own the model, you run it locally, and it's actually good enough for serious work. The implications here are huge. We're talking about AI capabilities becoming as accessible as any other software you'd install on your computer. No more API keys, no more worrying about your data being sent to the cloud, no more monthly subscriptions eating into your budget. Just download the weights and go. What's particularly clever about this move is the timing. OpenAI has been taking heat for years about the open in their name being misleading. Now, right when competition is heating up from companies like Anthropic and Google, they drop actual open models that prove they can play that game too. It's a reminder that despite all the drama and departures, OpenAI still has some serious technical chops and strategic thinking. The community reaction really tells the story, though. People aren't just excited about the technical achievement. They're excited about what this means for independent developers, for researchers without big budgets, for anyone who wants to experiment with AI without corporate gatekeepers. This is the kind of release that could spark a whole new wave of innovation because suddenly the barrier to entry just got a whole lot lower. Speaking of pushing boundaries and democratizing AI, while OpenAI is letting us run models on our laptops, Google DeepMind is taking a completely different approach. They're trying to generate entire worlds. Genie 3, a new frontier for world models. And now, let's dive into something that's got the Hacker News crowd absolutely buzzing with nearly 1,500 points. Google DeepMind's announcement of Genie 3, which they're calling a new frontier for world models. And honestly, after digging into this, I can see why people are both incredibly excited and deeply concerned about what this means. So here's what we're looking at. DeepMind has created an AI system that can generate fully interactive 3D worlds from nothing but text prompts. We're talking real-time generation at 24 frames per second, 720p resolution, and these worlds stay consistent for several minutes. You type in something like a cyberpunk city at sunset, and boom, you're navigating through it, interacting with the environment, all generated on the fly. Now, this builds on their previous Genie models, but the leap here is pretty staggering. The previous versions were more like proof of concept. This one actually lets you walk around and interact with these generated worlds in real time. Think about that for a second. We've gone from AI generating static images to creating entire explorable universes based on text descriptions. But here's where things get interesting and controversial. DeepMind is positioning this as a crucial stepping stone toward AGI, arguing that these world models provide unlimited training environments for AI agents. The idea is that if you can simulate any environment, you can train AI to handle any situation. It's ambitious, to say the least. The Hacker News discussion around this is fascinating because you've got this split between people who are blown away by the technical achievement and others who are raising some pretty valid concerns. One commenter, Rowan G077, made a point that really stuck with me. They said this feels like it has no practical value beyond the wow effect, because unlike ChatGPT, where you can export and use the text, these worlds just exist temporarily and then vanish. You can't export them, can't build on them, can't really do anything with them except experience them in the moment. And then there's the transparency issue that's got a lot of folks riled up. Google provided zero technical details, no research paper, no architecture diagrams, nothing. Just a flashy demo and some marketing speak. Multiple commenters are calling this out as a troubling shift from DeepMind's traditionally open research approach to something more like a product launch than a research announcement. The technical speculation in the comments is wild, though. People are trying to reverse engineer how this might work. Some think it's using VAE temporal downscaling. Others are talking about hybrid systems that combine text-to-image with image-to-world generation. One particularly interesting theory suggests they're processing tokens at rates that would require absolutely massive compute resources. We're talking potentially hundreds of billions of parameters here. But let's talk about those limitations for a minute, because they're important. The system can maintain consistency for a few minutes, which sounds impressive until you realize that for any practical application like gaming or training simulations, you need hours or days of consistency, not minutes. The physics simulation is apparently pretty basic. There's no complex game logic, no sophisticated social interactions. It's essentially creating beautiful, explorable dioramas rather than fully functional worlds. There's this comment from MareFox0 that I think cuts to the heart of a bigger question. They ask whether predicting pixels will ever actually beat deterministic rendering systems. Like, why generate an approximation of a world when we can programmatically create exact worlds with perfect physics and modifiable parameters? It's the difference between painting a picture of a car and actually building one. What really strikes me about this whole thing is how it represents this broader tension in AI development right now. On one hand, you've got these incredible technical achievements that feel like science fiction becoming reality. On the other, there's this creeping concern about whether we're solving real problems or just creating increasingly impressive demos. The AGI angle is particularly provocative. DeepMind's claim that world models are essential for AGI assumes that simulated environments can adequately prepare AI for real-world complexity. But as several commenters pointed out, there's a huge difference between navigating a generated fantasy world and dealing with the messy, unpredictable nature of reality. You might create an agent that's absolutely brilliant in simulation, but completely fails when faced with actual physics, actual people, actual chaos. And then there's the existential stuff that always comes up with these announcements. Some commenters are genuinely worried about AI replacing human creativity entirely. Game designers, world builders, artists. Others are more optimistic, seeing this as a tool that could democratize creative expression. Look, at the end of the day, Genie 3 is undeniably impressive. The fact that we can generate navigable worlds in real time from text it's the kind of thing that would have been pure fantasy just a few years ago. But whether this is actually a stepping stone to AGI or just another impressive but ultimately limited demo, I think the jury's still very much out on that one. The lack of technical transparency certainly doesn't help build confidence either way. You know, while we're talking about impressive tech that might not live up to the hype, let's talk about what happens when developers actually try to use AI in their day-to-day work. Now, this next story really struck a chord with the Hacker News community. things that helped me get out of the AI 10x engineer imposter syndrome. And wow, with over 900 points and 644 comments, it's clear this touched on something a lot of developers are feeling right now. You know what's fascinating about this? We've all seen those LinkedIn posts, right? The ones where someone claims their AI assistant just cranked out an entire microservice architecture while they were making their morning latte. And even if you're skeptical, even if you've been coding for years and you know these claims sound too good to be true, there's still that little voice in your head going, but what if I'm falling behind? The author of this piece went through exactly that journey. They started feeling genuine anxiety about their career, wondering if they were becoming obsolete because they weren't achieving these mythical productivity gains everyone was bragging about online. So they did what any good engineer would do. They investigated. They tried the latest agentic AI models, the thinking models, all the tools that promise to revolutionize how we write code. And here's the kicker. They didn't work. Not in the revolutionary, career-ending way that social media would have you believe. The author found that while these tools have their place, the reality is far more nuanced than AI makes you 10x more productive. As the author put it, reviewing AI-generated code is vastly less enjoyable than writing it yourself. The discussion thread is where things got really interesting. The consensus seems to be that yes, AI tools can boost productivity, but we're talking 20 to 50% for specific tasks, not 10x across the board. One commenter, Tracker FF, made an interesting counterpoint though. They argued that for beginners or when you're working outside your domain, AI really can provide those massive gains, like compressing months of learning into a weekend kind of gains. But here's what most people agreed on. The real bottlenecks in software engineering aren't about typing speed or even generating code. They're about understanding requirements, making architectural decisions, navigating organizational complexity. You know, all that messy human stuff that makes our jobs challenging in the first place. Several commenters pointed out that AI is great for what they called side quests, generating boilerplate, writing documentation, quick debugging assistance. But it falls apart when you need to design a distributed system or figure out why the product requirements don't actually make sense. There was this brilliant observation in the thread about how the whole 10x engineer concept is kind of broken to begin with. Like, we don't talk about 10x doctors or 10x lawyers. And the truly exceptional engineers, they're not the ones who code faster. They're the ones who figure out what not to build, who simplify problems before they become complex, who prevent entire categories of bugs from ever existing. One comment that stood out came from someone called Generalizations, who suggested that engineers who can't get major productivity gains from AI are basically telling on themselves, implying the problem isn't the tools, but how people use them. That sparked quite a debate. But I think what's really happening here is we're seeing the classic hype cycle play out in real time. The technology is genuinely useful, but the gap between the marketing promises and the daily reality is creating this weird psychological pressure on developers. And honestly, it's refreshing to see someone admit that maybe, just maybe, enjoying your work matters too. If using AI tools makes coding feel like drudgery, is that 30% productivity boost really worth it? The takeaway seems to be this. AI is a tool, not a replacement. It's changing how we work, sure, but the fundamental skills of software engineering, problem solving, system thinking, understanding trade-offs, those aren't going anywhere. And maybe we can all relax a little about not being 10x engineers because nobody really is. And speaking of tools that promise more than they deliver, let's wrap up with a story that Safari users have been waiting years for. Story 4. uBlock Origin Lite now available for Safari. Now, turning to our final story, uBlock Origin Lite has just landed on Safari. And wow, the Hacker News crowd has some thoughts about this one. This got over 1,100 points and sparked nearly 450 comments, which tells you right away that people have been waiting for this, or at least waiting for something like this on Safari. So here's what's fascinating about uBlock Lite, or uBlock as the cool kids are calling it. This isn't just a straight port of the regular uBlock Origin we all know and love. It's actually a completely different beast architecturally. Instead of running constant background processes that monitor and filter your web traffic, which is how traditional ad blockers work, uBlock Lite uses what's called a declarative approach. Basically, it hands off all the heavy lifting to Safari itself through Apple's native content blocking APIs. The browser does the actual blocking work, which means the extension uses literally zero CPU and memory while it's actively blocking ads. That's kind of incredible when you think about it, especially for mobile users who are always worried about battery life. And before anyone asks, yes, it comes with all the filter lists you'd expect. Easy List, Easy Privacy, Peter Lowe's ad and tracking server list, all the greatest hits are there. Users are saying that makes Safari feel noticeably lighter than AdGuard when browsing, which is interesting because AdGuard has kind of been the go-to for Safari users up until now. But here's where things get messy, and this is where the Hacker News discussion really heated up. First off, there's this absolutely maddening iOS compatibility issue. People are downloading it on iOS 18.5, thinking they're good to go, and nope. Turns out you need iOS 18.6 or later for it to actually work, even though the App Store will happily let you download it on earlier versions. That's just, come on, Apple. The number of frustrated comments about this was pretty remarkable. But the bigger issue that's got people talking is the web view problem. So get this, uBlock Lite works great in Safari proper, but if you're using an app that has embedded web content using Safari's web view, the ads are still there, all of them. This means when you click a link in, say, your Reddit app or Twitter or whatever, and it opens that in-app browser window, yeah, you're getting the full ad experience. One commenter pointed out this makes it feel like you're getting an inconsistent, half-baked ad blocking experience. And honestly, they're not wrong. The discussion thread turned into this fascinating debate about Safari's place in the ad blocking ecosystem. There's this user, Froundud, who pushed back pretty hard against all the Safari hate, basically saying, look, AdGuard has been doing excellent ad blocking on Safari for years. You're all just obsessed with the uBlock Origin brand name. And you know what? They might have a point. But then you've got a whole chorus of people arguing that Safari's content blocking APIs have been fundamentally broken or limited for years compared to what Firefox and Chrome extensions can do. What really struck me was how many people in the thread are just done with Safari entirely. User Chromka made this pretty compelling case for Brave browser, saying it's dramatically faster than Safari even with ad blockers installed. And there's a whole sub-thread of people talking about Origin browser, which apparently can run actual Chrome and Firefox extensions natively on macOS. That's wild. I didn't even know that was a thing. The technical limitation here is actually pretty interesting from a developer perspective. Safari's declarative content blocking API can only handle something like 150,000 rules total, while the original uBlock Origin on Firefox or Chrome can dynamically load and apply millions of rules based on what sites you're visiting. It's like, imagine trying to fight modern web advertising with one hand tied behind your back. That's essentially what Safari extension developers have been dealing with. You know what's really telling, though? Despite all these limitations and frustrations, people are still excited about this release. That speaks to how desperate Safari users have been for better ad blocking options. One commenter mentioned they've been checking for uBlock Origin on Safari literally every few months for years. That's dedication. Or maybe Stockholm Syndrome with the Apple ecosystem. Hard to say. The whole situation really highlights this ongoing tension between Apple's vision of a curated, controlled ecosystem and users' desire for the same powerful tools available on other platforms. Apple says these restrictions are for performance and privacy, and honestly, the zero-resource consumption of uBlock kind of proves that point. But when the practical result is that ads still show up in half the places you browse, well, that's a tough sell for users who just want the internet to be less terrible. And that's a wrap on today's top stories from Hacker News. What a day, right? We've got OpenAI surprising everyone by actually being open for once. Google DeepMind building virtual worlds that might or might not lead to AGI. Developers realizing that maybe they're not imposters after all, just because they can't 10x their productivity with AI. And Safari users finally getting a taste of proper ad blocking, even if it comes with a side of frustration. What strikes me about today's stories is how they all touch on the same theme, the gap between promise and reality in tech. Whether it's AI that's supposed to make us superhuman coders, world models that claim to be stepping stones to AGI, or ad blockers that can't quite block all the ads. We're constantly navigating this space between what technology promises and what it actually delivers. But you know what? That's okay. That's how progress happens. Not in giant leaps, but in these incremental improvements, these imperfect solutions that push us just a little bit forward. Today's open models from OpenAI might have pre-filled time issues, but they're still putting frontier AI in the hands of individual developers. Genie 3 might not be the path to AGI, but it's still generating interactive worlds from text. And hey, even if uBlock Origin Lite doesn't work in web views, at least Safari users have another option now. That's all for today's Hacker News Daily. Remember, out of 30 stories that hit the front page today, these were the 4 that the community found most compelling, most controversial, most worth discussing. Tomorrow, we'll be back with another batch of stories from the bleeding edge of tech. Until then, keep questioning the hype, keep building cool stuff, and maybe, just maybe, stop worrying about being a 10x engineer. Being a 1x engineer who actually enjoys their work seems pretty good too. This has been your August 5th, 2025 edition of Hacker News Daily. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you tomorrow.